Great. So, Scott, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, let me see. Is my screen share working correctly?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. All right, you want to just get into it?
Yes, would like to do that. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Great. So we're going to start off this presentation by covering the state of the Ethereum network. We're going to be covering network health, utilization, smart contract adoption, and how developer integration of projects is really driving a lot of these metrics. My name is Scott Bigelow, and I'm the VP of Engineering at Amberdata. And while this talk isn't going to be a sales pitch or a product demo, I'd like to quickly give you an idea of where this data came from and what our perspective of the Ethereum network is. So Amberdata provides services and dashboards that combine the validated blockchain data and market data from crypto exchanges, and we provide a dashboard, platform, and API, which allows developers to use them and reduces complexity from scraping exchanges and having to run archive nodes to grab this kind of information. So we have core metrics, like you see here: hash rate, difficulty, block times. We also track all contracts and look into the ways that contracts interact, security audits, and various aspects that are interesting to developers and investors. And using this information in the end of 2018, early 2019, we created this review. So this 2018 Ethereum in review, and this is still out there today. It's kind of a cool site, which kind of gives a snapshot of all the things that happened on Ethereum in 2018. Block numbers, of course. We also have transaction throughput and gas and how much ether was moved around and what the fee market was like throughout the year. We also looked into mining pools and what the distribution of mining hash power over the entire year was in order to look out for things like miners becoming too influential in the Ethereum ecosystem. But the problem with releasing something that is a year in review is that sometimes really, really interesting things happen right after the year ends. And that happened with the Constantinople hard fork, which was scheduled for early 2019. This was supposed to occur January 16th, but we all received this message, which was like, hey, there was a security problem. We're actually not going to be doing the hard fork on January 16th. We need to push it back while we evaluate a security vulnerability that was discovered through this process. And it was eventually announced again and shipped, and everything went great on February 28th. But what's really neat about a process like this that occurs is that you can see it in the data really, really well. So this is a graph of the number of blocks that were created through the last 18 months. The red line denotes where the beginning of 2019 was, January 1st, 2019. And so you can see that that report covered what was a pretty normal time, about 6,000 blocks per day, for every day of the year, and it started like dropping off significantly right up until that February 28th date. And even as the block production rate is plummeting, we have difficulty that is still going up. We have difficulty that is telling the Ethereum system to create blocks slower. And the reason for this is that by delaying the hard fork of Constantinople, it activated what was called the difficulty bomb, which caused blocks to get created slower on purpose, with the idea being that by making the Ethereum system slow down after some period of time, people are going to be more likely to want to hard fork it. And once you do that, you might as well throw in a few of the new EIP upgrades that you have in the mix anyway. It's a way to sort of incentivize people to actually hard fork the system. And so this is kind of a really cool way to look at data, but unfortunately we missed that in our 2018 Ethereum in review, and we look forward to putting this in the 2019 Ethereum in review. But of course, the blockchain doesn't really exist to create blocks. It exists to mine transactions, to validate transactions. So let's look at it that way. This goes from early 2017. This is a larger time frame, but we can see that while we have a pretty healthy quantity of transactions throughout 2019, it actually doesn't meet the peak that we had in early 2018. We're currently around 1 million transactions total by day, where we almost hit 2 million in early 2018. And I thought this was interesting because it sure feels like Ethereum is getting used a lot more than it was in those early days. And so when we took this data and broke it down by transactions which were transferring value, which we call EOA, or externally owned accounts, and separated those from ones that were actually invoking contracts, ones that were actually employing the full scale of Ethereum's usefulness, we can see that that early 2018 peak was a little bit, now I would say false in a sense. There was a lot of Ether being moved around, but there weren't as many transactions that were actually using Ethereum to its full potential. Whereas if you look in 2019, we're at some of our highest levels of using Ethereum as a smart contract platform right now. And of course, transactions aren't billed by count. Transactions are billed by the gas that they use. And so if we break this down further by how much gas was used by EOA transfers and how much gas was used by contract, we are definitely using the most gas on the Ethereum network to run smart contract logic. And I think this says a lot about how the Ethereum system has really, come into form as a system for running smart contracts and not simply just moving value from point A to point B. So I'd like to take the rest of this time to talk a bit about what these transactions are doing and why we're using this gas. And to do that, I'd like to focus in on a single transaction that I found. This was from, I think about 5 months ago, but there's many like it. And this is DYDX. This is a system that exists for margin trading on-chain using a variety of projects integrating with some of Maker's systems. So you can use this system in order to basically long ETH or short ETH. But when you send a transaction to DYDX, it doesn't just run code itself, it ends up calling other smart contracts, which call other smart contracts, and so on and so on. And by the time it's done, it's actually gone 6 levels deep here when it's actually transferring around the WEF and the DAI. And also in the process of making all these other transactions, it is integrating with the Maker system for a price feed and the Maker system that for the on-chain Oasis or ETH to DAI exchange. So there's the complexity of the contracts that require this call depth, but there's also the cross-project integration on-chain that has these deeper and deeper call trees. And if we start to chart the depth at which transactions are occurring on the Ethereum network, we would end up with a chart like this, where the darker the color is the deeper that transactions are occurring. So in this previous one where we had 1 happened here and 3 calls happened here and 1, this would be 1 happened here, we'd add 3 to this bucket and 1 to this bucket. So we can see that we are, there's definitely more deeper and deeper blues in this chart. It's a little bit hard to read because the number of transactions going up has been really significant. So if we take this exact same chart and scale it all to 100% to look at the relative distribution of contract call depth, we end up with this. And here we can easily see some of these patterns here. As these things are more blue, we're seeing more things are happening at the second call depth, more things are happening at the third and the fourth. We're starting to see significantly more complex contract calls being executed on the Ethereum blockchain. And the reason for this, I believe, is because there is a lot more project integration. And I'd like to focus on what some of these project integrations are and why they are so interesting for the Ethereum community. And to do this, I'd like to cover a few projects very specifically. We're not going to cover all of them, and the ones that I do cover like this, it's a heavily simplified version of the contracts, but in these diagrams, green is going to be the contracts themselves, and blue is going to be the tokens that end up being emitted by this set of contracts. So we had CryptoKitties, super fun, super popular, released a couple years ago. And it was released, but if you look at it, it's a bit of an island, right? It's like CryptoKitties exists kind of unto itself. It was great, it was a great project that I'm a big fan of, but it doesn't really integrate with any other projects in a meaningful way. Now we have the MakerDAO system. Again, this is a heavily simplified system because they have at least, I think, maybe 20 contracts that support this system. But at a high level, we have a few tokens here, MKR, WETH DAI, we can create CDPs. But the way it functions isn't really important. What's important is to kind of recognize that these two systems really exist in isolation from each other. And then also a couple years ago, we have REP. REP was being, or Augur, right? Augur was being formed and released. It ended up being released last year, and its system looks a bit like this. It has, it has the REP token. We have these markets where people can kind of predict the outcome of various real-world events, which get reported on by REP holders. And these are some tokens, right? We have this cash token here, which is essentially a wrapped ETH token. So let's go ahead and put this on the diagram with the rest of these projects. And again, Augur really exists in isolation from these other projects. In fact, this wrapped ETH right here and this, this cash, which is another token, which is just a wrapped ETH token, I mean, they do the exact same thing, but they're just not using the same one. If you have one, you actually have to convert to get the other. So it's a pretty clunky experience from just from the user's perspective. But let's see if we can make it a little bit better. A couple years ago, we also had the release of the DXYX project, which allowed easy on-chain trades between two users, between token A and token B, whatever those are. If somebody has to, as long as two people own those things and they can coordinate using the DXYX protocol, they can exchange these assets on-chain. And this made things a little more interesting. Now, if you actually, let's say you had Augur Cash and wanted to get to the wrapped ETH, you could easily transfer that without kind of unwrapping and rewrapping. Or if you had REP and you wanted to get MKR, you could easily make these things happen. You could start to kind of bridge between these various applications. I mean, before this, you would have to, transfer it to an exchange, get a good price, and transfer it back. It's a really clunky experience. This is starting to bring things together. Let's keep going. There's been a lot of attention given to Compound lately. The system where you can either provide your assets, either an ERC20 or Ether, and earn an interest rate on chain, or you can borrow those assets and then pay interest back later, which goes to those who supplied it previously. The high-level diagram for this looks something like this. What's really cool is that in doing this, in facilitating this lender letting a borrower have their token A for some period of time, which is collateralized by some other asset the borrower has, the Compound system actually emits a Compound version of that token. And that Compound version of the token can be used as an ERC20, just like anything else. So you can actually move around a Compound token using the DXYX protocol and start to really move these assets around in a very seamless way. And so if we wire this up, if we kind of start wiring this into this diagram, this map that we have of all these projects, we can see that now you can go between these projects and in a way that's not even permanent. If you needed MKR and wanted to borrow REP to do something, you could do that without even exiting your MKR position for a period of time. And this contract interaction here, these are all contract interactions, has occurred 250,000 times. So this is a fairly heavily used path on the Ethereum network. The protocol bridge. This is an interesting one that the InstaDApp project created, which allows you to take the position you have in Maker, where you have deposited ETH in order to withdraw DAI, and move it over into a Compound version of it, where you deposit ETH as your collateral to borrow DAI instead of to create the DAI in the first place. And because those have the same shape of deposit ETH and get DAI, and the deposit ETH and borrow DAI, you can actually move your positions back and forth using a single transaction. And there's various reasons you might do this. The interest rates from one to the other are going to be different. The collateralization requirements between Maker and Compound are different, and you can move them easily back and forth for whatever is the right thing, and not just be stuck in one or the other because it's too much of a hassle to go between these projects. Right? So it allows you to kind of move between a CDP and a Compound token. And if we wire this up, like, okay, well now we're starting to get some real network connectivity here. And in its first 2 weeks after it was deployed, over 300 people moved their transactions from one way to the other. We have Pool Together. Here's a system that allows a group of users who hold DAI to pool it all together and earn interest with this accumulation of DAI that gets deposited from all these users. And after some period of time, about 2 weeks usually, the interest of all that DAI that was pooled together from Compound is given to a winner. And then everyone gets their DAI back. So you can deposit your ETH and, in a sense, buy this lottery ticket, and then randomly one winner is chosen to receive all of the interest as the prize, right? And so this system works a little like this, right? So it's leveraging the compound DAI system in order to earn the interest and then do something a bit novel with it. With this project, the pool together contract becomes the owner of this compound DAI token that is earning interest every block and then eventually dispersing that to the random winner, while still allowing every other holder of the DAI to trustlessly receive their DAI in return and never actually lose any of their underlying DAI value. Okay, so we're wiring this up right here, right? We're getting DAI and compound and C DAI is kind of getting used in new and novel ways. EuniceWap. There's another exchange, I think about a year old now, that allows users to do on-chain exchanges similar to 0x, but 0x is a system that requires a bit of off-chain coordination. Buyers and sellers need to find each other offline using these various relayers that kind of pool this liquidity, and finding each other can be a little bit difficult. This system allows two users who have never met each other to exchange assets with this market that doesn't even have an order book. It relies on arbitrage in order to keep the price correct, and doesn't require those who provide the assets to it to run an advanced market making bot in order to make sure that the price is correct. So it's a new take, but I think this is a pretty cool project. It has an exchange for any token to ETH, and then because any token can go to ETH, you can go from any token to another token by making a round trip through ETH, and EuniceWap provides the functionality to provide this two hop mechanism to go from one token to another token with no off-chain exchange. And the EuniceWap has interacted with the DAI contract, just the EuniceWap DAI market has interacted with the DAI contract over 500,000 times. Right, so this is a really powerful way to create a new project that leverages and bolsters existing projects. I mentioned earlier the CryptoKitties, how they were kind of in an island on their own, and they have been until this point, until somebody had the bright idea to take these CryptoKitties, where each one of them is unique, and to wrap them in an ERC20 token, where you can give the contract one of your kitties, doesn't matter which one, but you have to give it a kitty, and it'll emit you one of their tokens, and then you can burn that token and reclaim any of the kitties that has been previously given to this wrapped CryptoKitty contract. And this is currently the owner, this 0x09FE. This is the wrapped CryptoKitty contract. It is the owner of tens of thousands of kitties. And you can, by acquiring one of these ERC20 tokens via any of the mechanisms we had talked about before, gives you the right to grab any of these kitties. It's a bit like a leave a kitty, take a kitty, bin. Right. So here's a system where they took one of these non-fungible tokens and they created a fungible asset out of it. And there's also a Uniswap market that allows you to go between this wrapped CryptoKitty, exchanging any number of them for any of the other assets that Uniswap supports. And this isn't just limited to these new projects. In Augur V2, they're dropping this cash, and they're actually going directly to DAI. So markets are going to be using DAI as the currency that these markets are denominated in. It's also going to be integrating directly with Uniswap in order to allow users to easily acquire rep, and to also act as a price feed, which is required for some of the crypto economic functionality of Augur V2. The new maker system, multi-collateral DAI. They're going to be using more than just Ether as collateral to create DAI. They're going to be using rep and BAT and all these other assets. And the voting is still going on, but these are the current list of things. So they're integrating with other projects' tokens to create their DAI system. And I think that this is a really important thing for projects to do, because Ethereum is a lot more interesting when the project ecosystem looks like this instead of this. And so, as you're building your things in Ethereum, make sure that the things that you're building have the right access points for other projects to build on top of and leverage. So that could be where all of your users come from, is via other projects building on top of you. And considering the wider ecosystem can help you leverage all of the assets that are out there, because this is the real network effect of Ethereum, of the space of Ethereum projects that provide functionality and a user base for you to tap into. Because when we talk about the state of Ethereum, we usually talk about blocks and transaction throughput and smart contract utilization, but really that's just health. That is just, it's important, but I think it's a pretty low bar for a system that is as vibrant as Ethereum. And I think that what's more important is to find a way to gauge and push project integration, because that's the way that we create a better user experience for the users, and we really push the whole ecosystem forward. So thank you. If you're interested in any more of this data, I invite you to check out amberdata.io, or please contact me on Twitter or email. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We now have a moment for questions. If you do have a question, you can raise your hand on the call box and I will call on you. Ramesh, it looks like you have a question. You have to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah, just curious to know whether this presentation be available later for public access.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you like to handle that, the organizer? I'll make it available on. I'll post it to my Twitter, and then the EEA can put it out however way they want. How does that sound?
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah.
Awesome, great.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? I'm just going through the list here. Okay.
It looks
Great.
like we also have a question in the chat box.
Oh, great.
So yeah, from Joseph Schweitzer. It looks like question. Given your close focus on the interconnectedness of the dApp ecosystem, which upcoming dApp or DeFi releases are you most closely following?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So EuniceWap v2 is coming out. I'm really excited about that. It's actually coming back to Solidity, which I believe that's true. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see the way that they push that through. I think that as more systems integrate, how about that? When you use EuniceWap, it allows contracts to really easily exchange tokens, where 0x has a little bit more overhead because of the way that it requires the off-chain communication. So yeah, EuniceWap v2 I think is going to be a big one. Here's another one. So now I talked about pool together earlier, where people can pool these assets and have a lottery based on the accumulation of interest. That's beginning to get generalized, and I've seen there's a few standards. I believe it's called RDI, which is kind of generalizing this notion of putting your DAI in a contract where interest goes to one place while you retain current control of it, as a way to like fund projects you really care about, or fund a DAO that you want to see succeed, but at the same time you don't need to give up any of your principal. I think leveraging some more of the stuff and making it a standard could really open up the ecosystem to a lot of funding options that are really novel. That's a great question. I like that one.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like we have a question from Charles as well. And his question is, on the slide, normalized frequency of call depth, there is a big spike in deep calls in mid-2017. What drove that?
Yeah, that's a fun one. Hold on. So I believe, let's see here. This one, I believe these ones. I believe this was the time that there was a DOS on the Ethereum network of, it used to be really cheap, like to make a internal transaction. Right now it costs, I believe, 700 gas for one contract to call another. It used to cost 40, I think is the right number. And so for a little while, somebody, for fun, created a contract which made thousands and thousands and thousands of really deep contract calls, because it's kind of expensive to do on the server side, but the gas cost didn't reflect that, and so they were able to do it really inexpensive. And there was a hard fork. In fact, I'll find the hard fork announcement and I'll post it with these slides, because it's interesting the way that somebody did this. And then the hard fork changed the rules to increase the gas price from 40 to 700, making that no longer a feasible way to attack the system. So I believe this was from a denial of service.
Great. Excellent. So if folks do have additional questions, definitely feel free to post. But we are going to, I think, head, oh, it looks like we have one more question here. Great. And this one comes from Wijia Zhang. Apologies if I mispronounced that name. Hi, Scott. Which dApps requires license to operate?
Oh. I don't know the answer to that one. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure on the licensing aspect of any of these systems. I mean, most dApps don't have any ability to restrict that access to. So I think it's going to be on a local. I think each user is more in charge of making sure things are acceptable in their own jurisdictions. But yeah, I don't know anything about that side of the certification process.
Great. Okay, so I think we have gone through. Oh, we have a question coming in from Isabella. Isabella, it looks like you are self-muted.
Yeah, can you hear me? This is Uday, actually.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're in the middle of designing a dApp on Ethereum. Any best practices or any guidance that you can give in terms of performance? We've known that to be a very bad hit, and also any guidelines on keeping the gas prices affordable.
Yeah, that's a really fun topic. So one of the things that I realized recently, I imagine, are you using Solidity?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I imagine you are. Yeah. So the optimizer, there's an optimizer on Solidity which allows you to deploy. Your contract deploys get larger, but every time you run them, they are actually more gas efficient depending on the actions that you're doing. And the default is actually kind of low for an extremely high utilized system. So one easy thing is just to crank that number up from 200 is the default, up into maybe 1,000, so long as you can still get your contract on the blockchain in a single transaction. Because it does bloat your deployment size, but you save gas every time you run it, the more optimized you've made that contract. Yeah, it's a tough one. There's also EIPs coming out which are going to be changing gas prices for storage reads, which might be significant. So if you're gas sensitive, it's kind of important to see the way that these things are changing. Some things are going up a lot, and some things are kind of staying the same.
Okay, just a follow-up question on that. Is there any documentation or any kind of pointers that you can guide me to? Because there needs to be a balance also on over usage of creating smart contracts at every transaction stamp versus doing it at a more aggregate level. So I'm just struggling, but then just don't want to take any missteps, or at least minimize the missteps. in the process of actually developing it, right? So any guidelines? I mean, it's a very generic question, I understand, but then your response is very specific and pretty nice. Just wanted to kind of run down that direction if you can. Give me some clarity.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think one of the best things that you can do is really set up like a local blockchain development environment and just try lots of different things. Like, I think if you have a local system and you can try 30 or 40 or 70 really quick and cheap and free deployments and see what the gas implications are of these various things, it's better than it's like, okay, the code's functioning, let me go ahead and ship it to mainnet and then we'll see what the gas price is when I'm actually paying for it with real ether. But as far as like best practices, I think that's definitely something that the community could probably use. Unless somebody knows one, I'd love to hear one. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. It sounds like an interesting problem. I could probably provide some more specific advice.
Sure, will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you again to Scott Bigelow for presenting. We really appreciate it. We're now going to move on to our second presentation, which is from the Ethereum Foundation. And we have two folks presenting on this, Aya and Joseph. Aya and Joseph, who would you like me to make a presenter for this presentation?
Does it have to be one of us, or?
If you have slides that you'd like to share,
then I am going to show the slides on my from my end, and then Joe might just jump in. Yes.
Perfect. So I will go ahead and make you the presenter, but you'll both be able to.
Oh, cool. Yes. Let me this. Great.
And Joseph, it looks like you might be self-muted if you wish to unmute yourself at any point.
Yeah, will do.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Well, without further ado, we welcome EF and Aya and Joseph to present. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Scott, for very, fantastic presentation to demonstrate the power of Ethereum platform, but also introducing many innovative projects in our ecosystem. I think I often actually use Amberdata data sometimes for my talks, and it's very fortunate to have someone is actually watching the data objectively, and I'm pretty sure that's very useful for many projects that are starting to use Ethereum or any other enterprises that are considering to use Ethereum too. So thank you. And our talk is going to be very quick, but also it's going to be very more general, since the Ethereum Foundation, I think explaining about the eea-eth is probably the first time at the EA's, any of the EA's meetings. And so this is going to be very general, what is the eea-eth is about. And so I'm going to go over very quick about the history and who we are, what we do, and then Joe can add anything more, but also we'd love to take questions that would be probably more productive. So we'll just start. So the Ethereum Foundation is a Swiss nonprofit foundation, which was founded in 2014 before the mainnet launch. And it is the main role of the Ethereum Foundation is to support the research and development activities of Ethereum platform, and in general, everything in the ecosystem. And originally, when this was founded, it was more like the members, the founders, including the creator of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, that the members of the Ethereum Foundations were the ones that are working on like R&D, and then who are building the Ethereum platform. But as you know, now the ecosystem has grown a lot bigger, and naturally, since this is a open source project, naturally attracted a lot of open source developers and researchers, and now none of Ethereum platforms projects are only done by the Ethereum Foundation's members. So with that, that now I think that our activities are a little bit more broader, and like we still have in-house R&D teams such as dev projects and tools, Solidity, GETH, security, and etc. And all these also projects are like coordinated efforts with other ecosystem members. And we do have research teams that are initiating or coordinating efforts in ETH 2.0, and our other activities involve community development, which is to support academics and schools. So we sometimes work with schools that are already, doing some research in Ethereum, or who are those who are interested in doing more research on Ethereum. And lately, we support more regional community activities that are like happening more recently, and who need more support, not just financial support, more of like, how we can connect them with others, for them to organize events or learn more about Ethereum. And sometimes we do get requested by some regulatory people, but that's not our main focus, but we do get requests, and then we try to respond to that. And grant program has been there, but we've been more active since last year, and that is really to like our main activity now, because this is really to make the ecosystem more decentralized but also more sustainable. And what's behind that is we empower community contribution in like the decentralized way, and instead of like hiring everyone within the Ethereum Foundation, we try to support projects or individuals, like from inside to outside, meaning like keeping them to be independently like do research or development, and so that the ecosystem can stay decentralized and also sustainable. And the funding, grant work, that's not like very new, but has happened before in the early stage too, but the activities were very small and minimum. And since last year, we kind of shifted our role or added our role to more, proactively support other projects or external individuals and projects outside of the Ethereum Foundation financially. And this year we are like also trying to add more work, meaning like working with potentially other funding partners to fund projects together. And yeah, and then in the end, it's we do really want to make this whole funding structure also as sustainable and as decentralized as possible. And so this year, or actually very recently, we realized that what the Ethereum Foundation can do, especially what only the Ethereum Foundation can do, is more than just money, more than just financially support projects. And our support can be a lot broader. And there are projects that are doing great work that may not need funding, but they might need more acknowledgement or recognition so that many other users or dApps can utilize those projects. And something like that we'd like to do more. So we just changed the name to Ecosystem Support Program, which is basically everything that we do to support anything in the Ethereum ecosystem. But it includes financial support and non-financial support, like I said, including communications. So this is really going to be, or we consider this to be our main activity now. And then still we do have researchers and developers who are doing important work. But again, that is not that only EF members are doing. So this new additional part, or something that hasn't been hasn't been more public, that is also like we will try to make the communication also better, which Joe might be able to add something to that. But so that is what we are just working on. But also we just started, we just launched this ecosystem support program, so that projects or individuals in the ecosystem can request to us, whether it's money funding or other support. So we did create the platforms to respond to those requests now, and then we're kind of still testing stage, but we are excited about this. And the last thing, it's actually getting bigger deal, but this is the DEFCON is something that the Ethereum Foundation organizes, and this is the only event we ourselves organize, and it's the event is getting bigger and bigger every year, and this year it's going to be in Osaka, Japan, and next month from October 8th to 11th. So I hope to see many of you who are on this call at the event. And that's the end of my talk. Joe, if you want to add anything,
Yeah, sure.
or if you, yeah.
So I'll just try to summarize with Ai's presentation here, and then we can open for questions. But I guess in summary, the EF tends to get a lot of questions about how development works, as if development's taking place through the EF, and that may have been the case at the sort of founding of the ecosystem, where all of the original development took place within the foundation. But I really wanted to illustrate how it's branched out since. So a lot of the questions that we get revolve around, say, how does the development process work, or how does the EIP process work, things like that. But if you've been following the conversation on Twitter this week between ETH2 implementation teams, if there are 7 teams active, only 1 is located within EF. There are all these independent groups like magicians and cat herders and so many others that work around how to create processes and standards, like the EEA is working on for different parts of this ecosystem. So we've come a long way since everything was located and based inside Ethereum Foundation, and I think that's just an important piece to illustrate, while also letting everyone know sort of what we're working on these days, which is that line between what's internal and what is external is really gone. And these days it's just about finding what at the protocol level is a priority that needs attention, and helping to drive that forward in whatever way we can lend help. That said, I know my own inbox. We get a lot of EF related questions each day. So if anybody has EF related questions, I think we're happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Going through here, it looks like we have a question from Ken. And his question is, what are some of the areas of focus in terms of technology?
Yeah, so as long as I'm the one that's unmuted. So when it comes to the tech itself, we're usually focused on the protocol level, the base layer Ethereum platform. So Scott did a great job of covering everything that dApps are building and how they're innovating. But the support that we're lending to teams is really about helping, aimed at helping to realize that original vision of protocol level Ethereum. So when people ask these questions of Scott, they're usually about take that one dApp developer who mentioned that he's building and he's worried about fees, gas fees, scalability, transaction speed. These types of areas, scalability, privacy proofing, how to shard a platform into 1,024 pieces, realizing proof of stake. These are the current protocol level focuses, and a lot of the funding coming out of the foundation right now is aimed in those areas and aimed at the ETH1X movement to make sure that the current Ethereum chain is healthy and functioning until we get there. So it's, in short, protocol level work aimed at helping protocol level Ethereum so that we stay on track to let everybody innovate as powerfully as they can. Great, thank you. And we have another question that came in from Weijia Zhang. Hi, Aya. Can you mention about Ethereum 2.0? What is the role of Ethereum Foundation on this? What is the progress? Is it on track? And have you become a board member of EEA and will drive for mainnet effort? Can you share what your plan is on the EEA mainnet? Aya, it looks like you are self-muted right now. If you want to take yourself off of mute. I may need to speak for Aya here. To chat. I think that we're experiencing technical difficulty. Let's see. All right, well, until Aya unmutes, I guess I'll save the dead air. ETH2 progress is moving forward. So speaking to the ecosystem generally, not exclusively EF's work, but this week, all of those teams run by Prismatic Labs, White Block, others, Status, Nimbus, they're joined together in a town in Canada to get these implementations to speak with each other for the first time, interoperable testnets. Ethereum 2, so it's called, also known as Serenity in the original roadmap and plan, is currently set to be released in at least 3 phases. Phase 0 is generally expected, timelines in blockchain, but generally expected early this winter. In early 2020, Phase 0 launches the beacon chain. This is the actual proof of stake piece of ETH2. It's the base layer of that ecosystem. Phase 1 introduces sharding, which has also been around in the roadmap since DEFCON 0 in 2014. That splits ETH2 into 1,024 interoperable blockchains. Phase 2 puts data on those shards. Eventually, the current roadmap is, as Danny Ryan, who is on EF side, explains, would be to merge in state data from ETH1 side onto ETH2. And I'll pause for another second to see if Aya is able to unmute just yet, but if she's not, I can probably also answer the question about EEA.
Hey, sorry. I just sorry, I was like, it got frozen. I can't stop sharing my screen my end. Can you stop it there?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, what was the question about EEA? Sorry. I think there was a question about.
Yes, there was a question regarding Have you become a board member of EEA and will drive for mainnet effort? Can you share what your plan is on the EEA mainnet? Okay. Okay, it looks like we lost Aya. So we'll see if she comes back on. In the meantime, let's move on to Philip's question regarding my team is considering applying for a grant for an Ethereum 2.0 client. It would be great if you could outline the grant application process, selection criteria, and feedback process. Thank you.
I'm going to defer to the ecosystem support team on this one. If you haven't already seen it, there is a newly launched website that was announced at DEFCON in Berlin just 2 weeks ago. You can find it at ESP, as an ecosystem support program.ethereum.org. Another short handle for it is ecosystem.support. There you can find the application for funding and other sort of oversight, guidance, mentorship in bringing your project to life. I know that ETH2 implementations are especially of interest, so absolutely go for it. Personally, I'd love to hear more. And it's pretty specific there in its outline, just requesting product description, needs, challenges, a bit about your team. From there, the process is that you'd be reached out to by a member of the ESP team, and they'd get into the weeds about exactly what's needed, what you're trying to accomplish, what makes sense as far as collaboration. So I'll leave it to the ESP team, but definitely get involved there. It looks like the link has been shared there in the chat box.
Great, thank you. And a couple folks are just asking about access to DevCon 5 tickets, since all tiers were sold out, if anything will be opening up in the future that folks should watch out for.
Oh no, we had a number of rounds this year. So the 3 waves did sell out fairly quickly. Sponsorship stayed open for a while, and we then ran 2 on-chain options, which did have plenty of time to jump into, and over the last week, a final appeals round. The final appeals round was also open for a week, and I think the vast majority of folks that applied there also received tickets. If somebody missed the 3 public waves, the 2 on-chain sale options, and the final appeals round, I don't know if there are any options. The event has sold out, I think, 4 or 5 years strong here, but I'll see if there's anything I can do. Absolutely no guarantees, but send an email to press@ethereum.org, and I'll be in touch.
Great, thank you. And one other question from Michael Scott. How are you thinking about and currently structuring supporting funding and non-funding in-kind development, for example, for opportunities around user cases on the ground? Activities perhaps that are happening offline that could be migrated or paralleled and documented through dApps and Ethereum specifically as a means of spreading and speeding adoption. Who are your philanthropic partners, and are you looking for more?
Gotcha. When speaking about philanthropy and social impact, that is one of Aya's favorite areas. If Aya, if you're online or want to jump in, go for it. But as far as funding goes for social impact related work, I mentioned earlier that protocol level work is of the ESP program's primary interest. That said, we did put out a survey earlier this year. You can find in the blog history at blog.ethereum.org. I think this went out earlier in the year, probably around February. We collected hundreds and hundreds of different groups that were already making change happen using Ethereum. They may have been working with resource allocations, supply chain management. There were different voting implementations, all kinds of interesting things. Again, feel free to reach out on the ecosystem.support or esp.ethereum.org pages, and they can be in touch. But we're happy to highlight projects that are of interest as well, just to sort of rebroadcast those, because EF isn't the only party in the ecosystem that's able to fund projects, and we might be able to set you up and be a great connector with other organizations that that are. So would love to hear more. Absolutely reach out, be in touch.
Great, thank you. And we have one other question from Carlos Tepeng. Is proof of stake already on? And if not, when?
Yeah, when POS has been everyone's favorite question for a long time. So I'm not a developer, I do comms work, but the scalability trilemma, I think it's called, also jokingly referred to sometimes as Zamfir's triangle for Vlad Zamfir, focuses on scalability, security, and decentralization of a blockchain. And in short, just putting proof of stake online isn't hard, right? There have been versions of proof of stake online since 2014 in Purecoin, but they're gameable in different ways. Solving for this trilemma is incredibly difficult, and developers in and around the Ethereum ecosystem, seem to have roadmapped out the best possible way to get there. You've seen other implementations go online, like DPoS systems that may only have 10 validators online, less decentralization, higher throughput. But solving that trilemma, that problem in a really thorough way has been something that's been worked on for a long time. Now, to answer the question, I mentioned phase 0 earlier. Phase 0 is the part of the Serenity release, the part of ETH2 that does bring proof of stake to life. Now, that is single implementation testnets are already online. Multi-client testnets are about to go online. That's where I mentioned that at this meeting that's going on in Canada right now, they've achieved interoperability between some of these different clients. And phase 0 is targeted for the earliest of early 2020. That's fun enough now, only about 4 months away from the beginning of the year. Earlier, there was a target date. It's not a firm target date, but sort of a goal date that was put out of January 3rd, and that's probably now somewhere in the early winter there. It's not a hard date, but yeah, it's as close as it's been, and the roadmap's clear, and all the researchers and developers are off to making it happen. The spec for phase 0 is frozen. It's all about implementation at this point.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we do have Aya back online here. I know we are 1 minute over, but I want to give you just the opportunity. I know we had some technical difficulties to answer the second half of that question.
Yeah, sorry, I was completely kicked out one time. And the second part of the question, sorry, I think I was asking the question.
Oh, sure.
And I got kicked out.
If you're asking, that's also fine. Either I just want to give you the opportunity to either ask or state.
Oh, okay. Wait. Was it about why I joined or we joined? I joined the EA as a board member. Was the question?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I will say that as the last note. Sorry about the technical problem, which I didn't expect. But yes, well, this was not really just about myself, of course, but this is to basically kind of like a message that we do need to, we talked, the entire ecosystem is growing, and because of the work from the community for the Ethereum platform, a lot of things are actually, moving forward, and the enterprise size is also growing, and many companies are already implementing things on Ethereum. And with that, we recognize the importance of communicating more, or bridging the research work or development work that is happening in the community, but also what are the requests or requirements, or like the challenges that enterprise side is happening. So we'd like to be the bridge. The Ethereum Foundation would like to be the bridge of that, and that is the reason that I decided to join the EA as a board member.
Great, thank you.
And I think, yes, that is my last message to close this. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And you probably have a lot more questions, and feel free to message to the Ethereum Foundation, and we're happy to answer to those questions as much as possible.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we thank you both so much for joining us today, and thank you everyone who joined the call as well, and to all our presenters. We very much appreciate it, and we hope that you have found some value in these presentations, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you, and definitely look out for our next education series happening in October. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.